Let's bring in our panel now. Doug Schoen is a former advisor to President Clinton and a Fox News contributor. Evan Siegfried is a Republican strategist and author of GOP GPS. I actually want to start with the Steve Bannon issue, if you guys don't mind, because that reporter was just on with us, if you heard that. Doug, the question that I asked him, where Steve Bannon says on his way out, that presidency that we fought for, that we won, that presidency is over. How do you interpret that?
First, I say that's good, because we don't need a hard right sectarian presidency that seeks conflict and confrontation to pull back from our global commitments and to try to eviscerate the social safety net that we need and protect. We need an inclusive presidency that seeks to bring sides together to confront our adversaries and challenges both here and abroad.
Evan, how do you interpret that comment?
Well, I think that the presidency, every presidency, goes through different phases. And this is a new phase where the president can have this fresh start with people who have been critics of his and say, all right, you didn't want Steve Bannon. He's no longer here. Let's get about doing the business of the American people. Let's pass tax reform. Let's do infrastructure. Let's go and go full steam and make sure that we are actually doing a job that the American people are happy with and aren't stagnating like we did in the first 8 months of the current year.
But Evan, part of the problem was always defining exactly what Steve Bannon's influence was and precisely what he stood for. It was so easy to call him a white supremacist. So many people said that, except for people who knew him and had worked with him and said that wasn't the case. I've never met him. I have no idea. But if you assume that, you know, now he's out, does the populism go with him? I mean, that seems to be so deeply ingrained in what the president himself actually cares about.
Well, first of all, Steve Bannon is not a white supremacist. I think that's been an unfair label that he's been tarnished with. But there are going to be people who are now going to say that Stephen Miller is the voice of the populism in the White House, and he's the white supremacist. Right. Stephen Miller's Jewish, so I don't think that really fits in with white supremacy. But I think that the president is going to have his fair share of critics from the left who will say that he does wrong no matter what he does. He could save a bus full of orphans, and they would say he did it only to get higher approval ratings.
Yeah. Doug, I mean, you say to renege on his global commitments. I don't know. I mean, the president has been more active in terms of where we need to get involved and what needs to be done than anyone expected. So, and that was with Steve Bannon there. So,
well, Steve Bannon wanted to pull back. He was against any possible involvement on the Korean Peninsula, anything in Europe. Steve Bannon was basically anti-globalist.
It was, but it didn't seem like the president was listening to him on that front.
Well, you know, we don't need the chief strategist for the president of the United States to be somebody articulating a isolationist message. Thank goodness the president is talking today at Camp David about how we can renew and reassert our commitment in Afghanistan. We have to confront an assertive Iran, obviously North Korea, the Russians in Europe and the Middle East. So we have huge, huge challenges. You're right, Melissa. Our president hasn't been listening. He's best to listen to his generals, to General McMaster, to General Mattis especially.
Evan, what does this mean about his support outside the White House and his base? President Trump has obviously a very loyal and a very fervent base. At the same time, Steve Bannon has, controlled through Breitbart a large number of people in the narrative in a great sense and has proved himself to be a media mastermind. Does he start working against the president, do you think?
Well, everybody thought that because Steve Bannon was fired from the White House, that he was going to go out and go nuclear and attack President Trump. But he's signaling he's going to do everything opposite. He actually is more dangerous out of the White House, helming Breitbart, which MIT just did a study that showed it's one of the most influential news networks in the country, if not the world, because of what it digs up and how it pushes the conversation nationally. And I think Steve Bannon, he is very smart, and he knows how to work Breitbart to get things out there. Remember what happened. He mainstreamed all of Hillary Clinton's problems in 2016 before he joined the Trump campaign by having the New York Times release the the damaging factual information about how Hillary Clinton had been engaging in pay-to-play. Steve Bannon is
How did he
very dangerous.
mastermind the New York Times releasing that information?
He was helping to write Clinton Cash through his organization in Florida, and the research they found that was in Peter Schweizer's book Clinton Cash, just before the book came out, Steve Bannon made sure that the information was passed to the New York Times. The New York Times was reporting it, which is much more trusted among liberals than it is among, or than say Breitbart. And when liberals are hearing from the New York Times something about how Clinton was engaged in pay-to-play, it was extremely damaging to her, and it helped stop her from winning the election.
Doug, what's your bet? I mean, does he really help the president's case from outside the White House, or do you think that he is going to be, sort of irritated and disenfranchised, maybe a little bit of vengeance mixed in there?
Yeah, that's what I think, Melissa, sadly, and I think Evan's right. He's much more dangerous from the outside than from the inside. I'm told he's going to war. He said that, I think, to Bloomberg yesterday. Goodness gracious, we don't need people going to war, whether he goes to war with Matt Drudge, with globalists. My attitude is we've got real problems. We've got real enemies. We can't fight among ourselves. We need to move past these divisions. Look, I'm against white supremacy. I'm Jewish. I find Nazism abhorrent.
I think everyone does.
I think you're exactly right. But more important, stop the fighting, stop the polarization, focus on what makes us unique and great as Americans: freedom and liberty and free speech.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, thanks to both of you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Melissa.